Let's together go back to the first Easter and slip into the sandals of two travelers on the road to Emmaus in Luke's Gospel, the 24th chapter. We read, now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days?" What things?" Jesus asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all the things the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Here ends the reading. These two travelers almost seem penciled into the margins of the New Testament. These are not household names. As a matter of fact, Luke can't even remember one of their names. It's Cleopas and what's his name? If you were filming some sprawling biblical epic, these would be two extras in a crowd scene. And then they wander off the set. They leave. After Jesus dies on Friday, they say, well, that's that. Might as well go back home to Emmaus. Have you ever noticed that at sporting events, there really are pretty much two kinds of fans? The first kind of fan is a diehard who stays through the bitter end no matter what. You know, this kind of fan, it may be raining and past midnight, and it's the 15th inning and the score is tied, and they will take a newspaper and they'll put it over their head and they'll wait till the final out. Or they're the kind of fan at a basketball game who'll stay glued to their seats even through garbage time. Their team may be losing by 30 points and they're praying for divine intervention to please bring out a victory. Well, these Emmaus travelers, they're the opposite kinds of fans, of which we have a whole lot here in Atlanta, by the way. If you go to an Atlanta sporting event very often, along about the third quarter or top of the seventh inning, you'll see people look at the score and then they look at their watches. And if it seems out of reach, they're going to start thinking about the early morning breakfast meeting, and they'll worry about getting caught in the traffic. They grab their Coke and they head for the exits. That's the kind of fans these Emmaus travelers were. I mean, they'd been all for this Jesus. They had followed him and they had been cheering for him and hoped that he was the person that he seemed to be, the very Messiah of God. And they had hung in with him all the way up until Friday when it all came to a shattering end on a cross. And now they just had a life to get back to. I mean, they had kids to pick up at grandma's house, and they had carpools in the morning, and they had reports that were due on Monday. And so they go back home to Emmaus. My first word to you on Easter morning is don't be like these Emmaus fans. Always remember, it ain't over till it's over. Have you ever been at a sporting event and you looked up and you saw there was no hope, so you said, I'm out of here, and so you left? And then you were out in the parking lot, and maybe you already had your key in the car door, and suddenly you heard this deafening roar from the stadium. And you said, what was that? And a little voice inside of you said, "O ye of little faith." Well, the ultimate "O ye of little faith" moment in sports took place in 1982 in a game between Stanford and Cal Berkeley. Playing for Cal Berkeley was a young, strapping, big surfer kid by the name of Kevin Moen, who was in my youth group out in Los Angeles. Toward the end of the game, Cal was ahead, and it looked as if Cal was going to win. And then the legendary Stanford quarterback, John Elway, led a brilliant comeback, brought the ball to within field goal range with only 8 seconds to go on the clock. Stanford sent out its kicking team, and they kicked a field goal. So the score was 20 for Stanford, 19 for Cal, with only 4 clicks left on the clock. Well, the stadium emptied. Everybody left, pretty much. And the diehard fans who stuck around for the obligatory kickoff saw Stanford kick this squib kick, and then the Cal players just seemed to want to have fun, like they were playing keep away or playing rugby, and they just threw the ball around like this, and they had 6 laterals. And meanwhile, the clock ticked down to 0, and the Stanford band looked up and saw the 0 on the scoreboard. They assumed the game was over, and they went running onto the field to celebrate their victory, not realizing that, of course, the play had to continue until the end. Well, my friend Kevin Moen, this young Presbyterian, was predestined for greatness that day. And Kevin Moen took that ball and he zigzagged through the Stanford band into the end zone and slammed into a trombone player. I want you to see the play. Take a look.
Harmon will probably try to squib it, and he does. Ball comes loose, and the Bears have to get out of bounds. Rogers along the sideline, another one. They're still in deep trouble at midfield. They tried to do a couple of... The ball is still loose as they get it to Rogers. They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone. He's going into the end zone. The Bears! The Bears have won! The Bears have won! Oh, my God! The most amazing, sensational, dramatic, heart-rending, exciting, thrilling finish in the history of college football.
Thousands of people outside the stadium said, "What was that?" Well, on the first Easter, those Emmaus travelers, they were too far away from the empty tomb to hear the screams and the shouts of, "He is risen, he is risen." They missed the victory. But here's what's so wonderful. On that day, the victory came to them. The risen Jesus on Easter comes alongside unnoticed beside these 2 nobodies who left early, and he walks with them. When you came in here this morning, we gave you a little gift, this little silver sandal. And that's a tradition we have here on Easter. We give out a little gift to reinforce the message of the Easter sermon message for the coming year. It's a simple message, and it's simply this: Jesus wants to walk with you. A lot of times in church, you hear Jesus wants your heart. Jesus wants your time. Jesus wants your money. Jesus wants to use your hands. This morning, it's so simple. Jesus wants your feet. Jesus wants to walk with you. Walking is our most natural form of transportation, but it's something that we only do today when we absolutely have to. How often do people say, "Oh, you won't believe it, I had to walk"? And yet, why was it that God created Adam? He wanted someone to walk with him in the cool of the evening in the Garden of Eden. The highest compliment you can pay anybody in the Bible is to say he or she walked with God. What will it mean for you this morning to walk with Jesus? Well, the first thing, let's take a step together. The first step is you believe that Jesus is here. He's alive. He's with you. The people who are walking along that road, they're talking to each other, and Jesus comes alongside. He says, "What are you talking about?" And the 2 men say, "Well, about what's been happening in Jerusalem." And Jesus plays dumb. He just deadpans, "What things?" And they look at him and say, "What planet have you been living on? It's all over the internet. It's on the blogs. It's on CNN about Jesus. This young man who we so believed in was brutally murdered by the powers that be." And for the next 6 verses, they just vent their sorrow and their heartbreak, because after all, Jesus is dead. How do you know he's not dead this morning? How do you know this dialogue isn't some just made-up fiction? What are the odds of somebody being dead on Friday? I mean, dead as a doornail, dead, heart stopped beating, body decaying. And then this morning, that same person suddenly comes to life and wakes up and opens their eyes, and they sit up and they dust themselves off and they walk out and they wander around and they suddenly pop up making small talk with some people on a road. Are you kidding me? That is not a doctrine of Christianity. It's the whole thing. The central tenet of the Christian faith is this man Jesus, this dead Jesus on Easter morning rose physically from the dead. And I got to tell you, if that didn't happen, we are, of all people on this planet, we're just kind of lost losers. According to the Apostle Paul in the Revised Pence translation, Paul said it in the King James this way. He said, if Christ be not raised, we are all, of all people, most to be pitied. End of conversation, game over, sayonara, turn out the lights. We all might as well go back home to Emmaus. You know, it's interesting how about 100 or so years ago, some people began to waffle on this astonishing Christian claim. And they'd say, well, because, actually science shows it's impossible for someone to rise from the dead. And so people began saying, but we can work with this. After all, after Jesus died, his followers had a sense of his presence. And so we can say that Jesus rose in the hearts of his disciples. And all of that inspiration morphed into some legends that he actually rose physically from the dead. One of those skeptics was John Dominic Crossan, who used to say, Emmaus never happened, Emmaus always happens. Emmaus never happened, Emmaus always happens. What he means by that is it's just fiction. It didn't really happen. But Emmaus always happens whenever someone who feels despair suddenly again begins to feel hopeful. Now, what's wrong with that? What's wrong is it falls apart as pseudo-intellectual nonsense because it turns ancient people into nothing but gullible airheads who will believe anything that people tell them, no matter what they say. Ancient people knew how to tell when somebody was dead, and they knew that death was final. The theologian N.T. Wright says ancient literature shows people totally grasp the finality of death. I mean, otherwise, how do you explain all of the screaming and yelling and the chaos when they found a tomb was empty? It's a little like the story of the woman who looked out of her window one day and saw her German shepherd shaking the life out of her neighbor's pet rabbit. And her family didn't get along well with her next door neighbor, so this was really a crisis. And so she went and she got her broom and she pummeled her dog until that dog finally relaxed its jaws and let the rabbit fall out on the ground. And the woman panicked. She grabbed that rabbit and she took it in her bathroom and she shampooed that rabbit. And then she blow dried it. And then she combed it to make it look as live as possible. And then she tiptoed over into her neighbor's yard and propped it up in the cage, trying to make it look alive. And then she sneaked back to her house. About an hour later, she heard screams and shrieks from next door. And she went over and she said, "What's wrong?" Her neighbor yelled, "My rabbit, it's my rabbit. It died 2 weeks ago and we buried it. And now it's back." Ancient people knew dead rabbits stay dead. The church did not create the resurrection. It was the resurrection that created the church. And so we put all our eggs in the Easter basket and say, on this morning long ago, Jesus physically rose from death. And so when you walk with Jesus, your first step is you believe he's there. That's step one. Then step two, second step to take is that you let him into your life so he can have an impact. There's an amazing phrase here in this narrative. You notice Jesus is walking alongside these people, and what does it say? Nonetheless, it says, they stood still, their faces downcast. They're in the presence of the risen Jesus, and they stood still with their faces downcast. That is the scene that is being reenacted in pews and churches all around the world today. It is possible to be in the presence of Jesus on Easter morning without us having the slightest impact on you. You can still live a defeated life. You can still feel empty and hopeless. And so you got to take that next step, and that is you open your life for him to have an impact on you. There's a tendency for some of us to be what I call check-the-box Christians. This morning we recited the Apostles' Creed, and there's a tendency for some people just to say, okay, I believe in God, check. I believe in the virgin birth, check. I believe in the resurrection, check. But walking with Jesus is less about religion than it is about a relationship. You know him. You do more than read the Bible. You almost hear his voice. You know his likes and his dislikes. You enjoy his presence. The two of you solve problems as you go through life together. Sort of like the difference between a country dog and a city dog. You know, think about it. If you're going to be a dog, you want to be a country dog. Country dog has just acres of room to roam, and country dogs can just run free in their wide open spaces out there. And a country dog can go down to the creek or chase a skunk or forage for food, or can go just flop out in the sunshine and take a nap out in the pasture. And yet there's something about that country dog. At the end of the day, that country dog always winds up in the same place where he wants to be, and that is on the master's porch. I mean, the country dog has seen it all, done it all. He's been to Gay Paris, but at the end of the day, he's got his favorite place that he always wants to be, and that's at his master's feet. Mainly because he knows that that's where he's got the best chance of getting a biscuit, getting his tummy scratched, you know, so his leg goes like this, and getting patted on the head. Well, the exact opposite, however, experience from the country dog is a city dog. You know, a city dog, you don't want to be a city dog. City dogs are all cramped up all day long inside the house, and they're forbidden to leave. And you know what the one goal of a city dog is? To get out of there. To just run away. And so what does a city dog do? He sits there staring at the door all day long, wondering, when will it open? How wide? And do I have a shot at getting my nose through there and get out of here and run? Some of you may have a city dog. I've had one for a while, and oh my. And you have to chase them, and maybe you even have to jump in the car and drive around the neighborhood yelling your dog's name out the window, begging your dog to come back, and you finally get them cornered, and you got to bribe them with a biscuit or try to lasso them with a leash or something like that. One of the great problems is there are so many city dog Christians. They don't know their master. And their experience of God is that God is some kind of a cosmic killjoy who just keeps them on a leash all day long and jerks them back and keeps them from having fun. In other words, it's all about rules and not a relationship. But I'll tell you, that old country dog, he just loves to heel. Loves to be right there at the master's side, and not only that, to run and to fetch and do great big circles out in the field, but he always doubles back to his favorite place, to be right there at his master's side. I want to tell you, Easter happened 2,000 years ago to turn you into a country dog. For you to know the joy and the freedom of walking with Jesus. To know your master's voice, to feel his touch, and every night to fall asleep right next to his feet. Problem is that the world mostly notices the city dog Christians. One such person is a skeptic, is the columnist Nicholas Kristof, writes for the New York Times, and he wrote a column where he was critical of certain kinds of Christians. He said one landmark sign of a shift in public attitudes, a poll last year found that Americans approved more of gays and lesbians, 53%, than evangelical Christians. That's partly because some evangelical leaders were intolerant blowhards who give faith a bad name. And there's some real truth in that. But then he goes on to lambaste those kinds of Christians. But then he goes on to say this. He says, but there's this funny thing I keep running into when I travel around the globe and I go to the places of the greatest need, where there is the most suffering. He said, whenever I go to the place where it has the least amount of hope, there always tends to be some lonely Bible missionary all by himself, fighting disease and ignorance and poverty. He says that he was just recently in the nation of Angola that has the highest mortality rate of children in the entire world, and he ran into a 65-year-old white-haired missionary named Stephen Foster, the son and grandson of missionaries, and he's lived in this remote village for 37 years. And he says, along with fighting with disease, Dr. Foster has to fight 6-foot-long cobras as he works in his clinic. Recently, there were some angry soldiers who came and fired AK-47s at his feet. And he deals with such few supplies that he once, for a surgery, turned the tube for his car's windshield wiper system into a catheter for draining a patient's bladder. As he was raising his children, his son got polio in that village. His daughter survived cerebral malaria, and they were often hungry because they were sharing their food with starving villagers. Oh, by the way, you know how much money Dr. Foster makes a year? A whopping $35,000 a year. Because he's married, but if he were single, it'd be $17,500. Nicholas Krostoff says, where do you get these kind of people? What makes this kind of person tick? I'll give you the answer. It's very simple. And that is, Dr. Foster's an old country dog. He just loves being by his master's side. And every day he feels himself walking beside Jesus. And when he's doing a surgery, Jesus comes and he scrubs in that surgery, there in that operating room. And when he holds a little sick child, his arms become the arms of Jesus. And Dr. Foster, I think I could speak for him in saying that he would say, there's no way he could do what he's doing if it were not for Jesus being there at his side. And that's the amazing thing about walking with Jesus. People who do that are often doing things in the power of somebody else. And you know, that's not all of it. Because of Easter, Jesus is there beside Dr. Foster. And also because of Easter, if one of those cobras were to bite him and he were to die, Dr. Foster would still have an eternity to live. Because you see, if you take that first step with Jesus and you know he's there, and you take the second step and he walks with you, then you end up at the third step, which is that your conversation with him goes on and on forever. Easter makes us indestructible. Those earliest Christians used to climb up on their crosses singing hymns, believing that they would see Jesus face to face when they woke up on the other side. We pastors are always being asked, will I see my loved one again? Will I see my wife? Will I see my husband? Will I see my child again? The answer is a resounding yes. Jesus undid death on Easter. There's coming a day when you and I are going to get our loved ones back. And if you believe C.S. Lewis, we may even get our pets back, according to Lewis. You can get your country dog or city dog back, only they'll behave now. There's coming a day when everything sad that ever happened comes undone. That is the promise of Easter. And so this morning, let me just ask you this one question, and that is, where are you this morning in your walk with Jesus? Are you a frightened person who wants to find confidence? Are you an anxious person who at last wants to find some peace in your soul? Are you a sarcastic person who would like to change and stop hurting people and be the kind of person that other people open up to? See, Jesus comes to you right on the place in your road where you're struggling this morning. This one who died today lives for you. And he's crazy about you. I mean, he's got your picture on his refrigerator. He knows your name. And if you're not one of his followers, today could be the beginning of a whole new life for you. Someone has said it's never too late to be the person you might have been. You may think that your whole life searched unsuccessfully to find God, but let me just pose this thought. Could it be that you're here this morning because God already found you? If you're not a follower of Jesus, I believe that Jesus, your whole life, has been walking alongside you like he was with these Emmaus travelers, and he's been orchestrating a massive conspiracy to turn you into one of his followers. Because in the end, ultimately, even our wrong roads lead us to the right place. Today's sermon can be your Emmaus road, and it just takes those 3 easy steps. First of all, you believe he's there, he is risen. Then you open your life to walk with him. Let him have an impact on you. And then third, you know that conversation you're having is one that goes on and on and on and on for all eternity, forever.